In our last video, we talked about one of the two most common Part 1 questions you will get, and that is questions about where you live. Today, we're going to talk about the other most common topic that will be covered in the Part 1 on your IELTS exam, and that is, what do you do now? Do you work or are you a student? By the end of the video, you're going to be able to answer that confidently in a way that sets you up for IELTS speaking success. If you don't know, my name is Kevin. I'm a former IELTS examiner and current IELTS speaking teacher. Let's get started. If you don't remember, these Part 1 questions are really super important because despite being a little boring and you may think a little simple, they're the first chance you get to speak to your IELTS examiner, and they're the first time your IELTS examiner is going to hear you speak. So, from the first word that you say, your IELTS examiner is listening and trying to figure out what band score you are. Of course, the entire score is not based on these questions, but they are important. Because they're important, it is important for you to take them seriously and to build a tight and focused answer to the questions that are coming. For example, what do you think is a better response? If the examiner asks, what do you do now? Do you work or are you a student? If you say, I'm a student, or I'm a university student, I study history, or I'm a student, I study history in Hanoi. For example, I'm currently taking a class about ancient civilizations in Asia. What's a better answer? Of course, it's the second one. You're producing more language. You're answering the question with more sentences and more detail, and it's much more fluent and responsive to the question. The technique I used to answer that is something I talked about in the last video, and that is the 3S technique. 3S stands for state, support, and specific example. I told you I was a student, I told you what I was studying, and I gave you an example of a class I recently took. That's the first question, and there's going to be some common follow-ups to that, and they might be, why did you choose this subject to study, or why did you choose this line of work, if you answered that you're an employee somewhere. The examiner might ask you, do you like it? They might ask you, what's the most interesting thing about studying or working? Or what's the most difficult thing about studying or working? It's important to note that all of the supporting questions will be built around that initial question of what you do now. The examiner actually has two different sets of questions, depending on whether you say, I'm a student, or whether you say, I'm currently working. Imagine the examiner asks you, are you a student or are you currently working? Let's say that you want to talk about working. I'm going to put on the screen two different answers at a 5.5 band and a band 7+. Let's look at them. At a band 5.5 example, we see, I work in an office. It is okay. My boss is nice. Very simplistic. Simplistic in structure, simplistic in vocabulary. A band 7.5 example might be something like this, though. I work as a banker at a large bank. I enjoy it because I get to use data to solve real-world problems. There's always something new to learn. For example, last week, I helped my boss launch a new project. As you can see, the higher scoring answer is using specific vocabulary, it's following the 3S framework, and it's built in a more complex way. It's a much better answer, and yet it still sounds very natural. It does not sound memorized, and it does not sound like you're overly using academic words. It sounds real. Now I want to give you two questions, and I want you to pause the video for 10 seconds of preparation and then give your answer. try and use the triple S method. For our first question, what do you do? My response would be, I'm a teacher. I really like it because I get to meet lots of different students. For example, I work with students of all ages from all over Vietnam. State, support, specific example. The second question is, why did you choose that job? My response would be, I needed a change. I used to be a lawyer and I didn't like it anymore, so I became a teacher. When I was a lawyer, I had to work behind a desk all day. But now that I'm a teacher, I get to be up in the classroom or online with my students, and that was just the change I needed. State, support, specific example. Even though I didn't use the words for example, which you don't want to do every time, I still gave a specific example about the change between lawyer and teacher. It's a much tighter answer. A lot of my students tell me these questions are very boring. But remember, if you treat the IELTS speaking exam like a conversation or coffee date with your examiner, they're not boring. These are the first questions you want to ask when you meet someone new. And it's really in how you talk about them. Even the most boring thing can be made to sound exciting if you use the right words. So, my question to you is, what do you do now? Do you work or are you a student? Try and use the triple S method and leave an answer in the comments below for my feedback. Until next time, happy studies.